It is so great to be joined today by Miguel Robles-Duran, who is Associate Professor of Urbanism at the New School Parsons School of Design and co-founder of the nonprofit Cooperative for Socio-Spatial Development, Cohabitation Strategies based in New York City and in Rotterdam. Miguel, it's so great to talk to you. We've been analyzing the 2016 election results through an economic lens, rich, middle class, and poor. We've been analyzing it through educational lenses and in so many ways. But one of the clearly growing divides in the United States is that between rural, suburban, and urban cities. And in fact, Donald Trump many times talking about inner cities and using the word urban and talking about non-white groups almost interchangeably in a way that was actually a little bizarre, but maybe that's getting us a little away from what we want to talk to today. How important is this lens of the divide between where people live in the US?
Yeah, no, it's quite a dramatic situation that we're facing today. I mean, as we have been reading from since the election and happened until today, there's been a lot of articles that relate to that situation as the urban-rural divide, and I also want to emphasize that you also did was a suburban divide, which I think it's even more important than the other two for the case of the election. Now, on one hand, we have a situation where, yes, there's a call for a network of, should I say, rebel cities or sanctuary cities. Right now, I think we have already around 35. I mean, there's a series of cities that are already engaging in sanctuary spaces. And of course, clearly, as we know, 35 of the largest cities in the US beat Trump by a big margin, 59%. And then you have a situation where there's a polarization happening, which we've never seen for a very long time. Perhaps it's the first time that we see a polarization of such dimensions. The big issue that we see or that I see on this has to do with emphasizing that cities continue to be sort of like these spaces where we harbor some kind of progressive politics, but at the same time we continue to abandon, and as we have for many, many years, the rural and the suburban spaces, which are very much codependent with urban centers, right? So the situation today is actually quite unique, and we're battling on how to deal with that.
So one thing that I think would be interesting to get your thoughts on would be sort of a which came first. In your analysis, does it appear as though if you grow up in a rural area, for example, you are more likely to end up being more politically conservative and voting for Republican candidates? Or is it that if you are already predisposed based on parents or whatever else to be conservative, that you ultimately find your way to more rural areas? Do you have a sense of that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a very long history on the suburbanization of the United States, and I want to emphasize that McCarthy, I mean, the guy behind McCarthyism, was very much engaged in the promotion of the development of Levittown, which is considered to be one of the first suburban towns in the United States,
Yeah, Bill
and he
O'Reilly's
argued.
hometown.
Yeah, and he argued to Congress that they needed a capitalist mode of basically of living vis-a-vis what the Russians and other socialist countries in Europe were proposing, which were more collective forms of living. His argument was that in a suburbia you can be divided in a way that you don't interact with your neighbors. It's less of an issue of organizing. And the focus on this would be, of course, consumption, right? And many of other things. And so the ideology really played a very big role in the definition of what suburban America is. Now, so we can go from there. Of course, we can go to the 19th century and so on. But I think in the United States, it's very telling that that idea of individualism is very tailored to the territorial sort of definition, on how people engage in their daily lives. It's less contact, right? On the other hand, you have the urban spaces, right, which is normally, I mean, of course, we call New York, San Francisco is very compact, but in general, you have a much more daily experience of the other, right? And therefore, your sense of daily life becomes quite adapted to the experience of the other, and most certainly understanding the other position, right? In suburban environments, you have much less contact with people, and therefore it's an obvious, result, from this.
When we look at cities, two growing issues, and one I discussed recently, there was a very interesting article, I think it was in The Atlantic, talking about the increasing unaffordability of liberal cities in the United States. I'd love for you could pick either or both of these and sort of tell me which direction you want to go in first. Affordable housing in cities and or zoning in big cities. Which of these do you think is more important to sort of think about in terms of how it relates to politics and different populations and how they're distributed in the United States?
Yeah, I mean, this, of course, targets, I mean, if we want to extend to this election sort of topic, I mean, it targets a lot what are the big issues within cities today. I mean, most cities right now in the United States, the large cities, are impossible actually to be able to live in. I tell my friends that if you want to come to New York City, you might want to be sure of what's your salary, and your salary, you're talking about six-figure salaries, to be able to live even a more like decent, life over here. The prices of housing continue to rise, and this has to do a lot with the speculative factor that cities have been aiding, developers in pushing. There's this big discussion today about that supply and demand will solve the situation and let developers, for example, continue building affordable housing. But we always argue that supply and demand never works. I mean, never works ever, but especially in the housing issue, because housing is normally treated in this economy as a commodity. So it's not a matter of supplying housing for those that need it. It's a matter of supplying housing for the investors, for those that want to speculate on the housing. And meantime, those that need it don't have enough housing to address. And so most of the contemporary ways or dilemmas on reaching affordability, which have to do with zoning or putting other programs like 421A or some other policies that have to do with fiscal incentives to developers, continue to emphasize the idea that it's to promote speculation, all of them, including zoning and so forth. It seems to me that we need a very radical restructuring on how we think housing, especially on the context of cities, but also, as I want to say, I don't want to polarize, the suburban and rural areas, which are also very dependent on the prices here. You can see, for example, in city centers like New York, you have right now most of the rural areas upstate now increasing in prices, making it even less affordable for those that were thinking of moving forward, or moving to a different area that is more affordable. So we have a conundrum. And right now with Ben Carson in charge of all of these, I think we can just see an exacerbation of all these politics, especially because they're going to be pushing it towards more privatization and more the idea that housing is a commodity and it's not meant for people to live in. It's meant for as a currency, right? So to accumulate.
When one of the areas in which, at least at face value, it seems that progressives might overlap with President-elect Donald Trump is on the idea of significant infrastructure spending. Now, if we for a second put aside the specifics of how Donald Trump would do the infrastructure spending is the same type of status quo crony capitalism that we've seen for a long time. Let's just temporarily ignore that for our conversation. If there were to be significant infrastructure spending done in cities, what in particular do you think could be done to increase the amount of affordable housing and or deal with the increasing lack of affordability in these cities? How could that money be spent?
Yeah, I mean, whether any regime, if I should say, I mean, whether it would have been Clinton or Bernie or in this case Donald Trump, we would be facing with infrastructure spending. Of course, you raise the property values. If you build a decent park or a decent bridge or more public transportation systems, clearly there's going to be a demand from those that speculate on property or those that want to move to a better place. Let's say that it's more to their liking. So in my opinion and the opinion of several of my peers, I mean, there's only one way to go forward with these, and these would be to structure different policies that enable different kinds of speculation. And I want to call a specific type of speculation, which is a predatory form of speculation, which is the norm at this point. You buy something for 500,000 one year, and then you sell it the next year for $1 million, which is crazy. In New York, we have seen things that are just unbelievable, the rise of prices and the way that these predatory speculators operate. So as long as we don't have policies that break or that somehow balance, either through fiscal incentives, either to the promotion of collective property, which is the one that I favor a lot, community land trust formations, which Bernie Sanders experienced a lot in Vermont, and he was very engaged in this, which is forms of property that cannot be speculated upon. That basically you buy the house and then you can sell the house just with inflationary rates on top, but not anything extra. And those type of housing sort of schemes getting to that idea that housing is a right, and it's not something that we can trade upon in a way that any normal commodity should be done. So in our principle, I know it sounds very radical, but there needs to be different laws that break or policies, the amount of speculation that is going on. And this is, again, independent of if it's Trump or Clinton or Bernie Sanders, right? These will continue to happen.
Incredibly important issue, and one that we're going to continue following: the growing socio-political divide between rural, urban, and suburban areas. Miguel, thanks so much for talking to us about this today.
Thank you very much, David. It was a pleasure being on the show.